It started as a day like any other, ordinary to its core. The sun filtered through the blinds, casting soft streaks of light across the backyard. I sat in a lawn chair, coffee growing colder in my hand as my gaze fixated on her. Through the window, she moved in that way she always did, precise, almost rehearsed. She was folding laundry on the couch, her attention flitting between the task at hand and the phone she had perched precariously against a throw pillow. The way she smiled every now and then, at nothing in particular, set my teeth on edge. Something was different. I couldn't pinpoint when the change began. Maybe weeks ago, or maybe I just ignored it for too long. But lately, her behavior had shifted. A little colder, a lot quieter, always careful, as if measuring her every word. It was subtle, like an itch you can't quite scratch, but it was there, and it was maddening. The scent of cologne that wasn't mine lingered in the air when I came home some nights. At first, I wrote it off. Maybe the dry cleaner had switched her hangers with someone else's. Maybe one of her co-workers was overly fond of dousing themselves in expensive brands. But the rationalizations only worked for so long. Now, as I watched her, those excuses felt hollow. I knew better. For the past 3 days, I kept my distance, observing, quietly cataloging every moment that didn't add up. The late-night phone call she ended as soon as I entered the room. The sudden interest in locking her screen whenever she caught me glancing at it. And those moments, like now, when her eyes would light up at something unseen on that phone of hers, only to darken the second I walked in. Yesterday morning, as I was getting ready for work, she called out from the kitchen. "Are you leaving already?" Her tone was casual, almost too casual. "Yeah," I replied, checking my watch. "I'm late." She hesitated. "You don't sound like you're at the office when you call these days." No papers shuffling, no people in the background, just quiet. Her voice carried something under the surface, something heavy and questioning. "I don't have a private office," I'd shot back. "Sometimes I step outside if it's too loud." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't exactly the truth. And the way her lips pressed together before she nodded, that quiet acknowledgement, told me she didn't believe me any more than I believed her. I shifted in my chair, still watching her through the glass. She looked up suddenly, her gaze meeting mine. My stomach tightened. Did she know I'd been sitting there this whole time? She gave me a tight smile before turning away, but her movements changed. Less fluid now, more deliberate. She was playing a role, and I was her captive audience. Deciding I'd had enough of the guessing game, I pushed myself out of the chair and made my way back into the house. The floor creaked under my weight, and I braced myself for the confrontation I wasn't entirely sure I was ready for. When I stepped into the living room, she was still on the couch, a movie playing on the TV. Her phone, now clutched tightly in her hand, went silent as I approached. She looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing her face before she recovered. "Hey," she said, her voice light. "How long have you been out there?" "Not long." I gestured toward the TV. "What are you watching?" "Just some rom-com. You wouldn't like it." I didn't sit down. Instead, I stood there, staring at her. "Who are you talking to just now?" She blinked, her fingers brushing the lock button on her phone. "No one important. Just a quick call with a friend." Her tone was breezy, but the way she shifted on the couch gave her away. I was no stranger to her tells. The way her left hand tightened on the armrest. The way her eyes flicked toward the hallway as if searching for an escape. "Really? Because I thought I heard you say, 'Sorry, my husband just got home'?" Her eyes widened for the briefest of moments before she plastered on a tight smile. "Oh, that. It's just Julia. You know how she likes to gossip. She was asking about a guy she's seeing, and—" "Don't!" The word came out sharper than I intended. Her explanation trailed off, the air between us growing thick. She exhaled and set the phone down on the coffee table, the screen face down. "You're being ridiculous." "Am I?" My voice was low, controlled. "Because you've been acting strange for weeks. You don't text in front of me anymore. You don't answer calls when I'm around. And that cologne. For God's sake, it's just work." Her voice rose, her words laced with exasperation. "You're making something out of nothing." "Am I?" I crossed my arms, holding her gaze. "Then tell me. Prove me wrong." She stared back at me, her jaw tightening. For a moment, I thought she might say something, might finally offer me the truth, whatever it was. But instead, she stood, brushing past me without a word. Her footsteps echoed as she disappeared down the hallway, leaving me alone in the suffocating silence. The movie played on, its cheerful soundtrack mocking the heaviness in my chest. I sat down heavily on the couch, staring at her abandoned phone. My hand hovered over it, the temptation gnawing at me. I didn't pick it up. Not yet. But the questions swirling in my mind weren't going away. And I had a feeling the answers would cost me more than I was ready to pay. I stayed on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen. Her phone was still there, a silent presence on the table. It was almost daring me to pick it up, to break that unspoken rule between us. But I couldn't do it. The argument had left me drained, a heavy feeling pressing on my chest. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I'd let my imagination get the better of me. The weight of my own guilt started to settle in, twisting in my stomach like a knot. I replayed the last few weeks in my head. The tension, the mistrust, the tiny cracks in our once solid foundation. What if I'd been reading too much into things? What if I'd created this mess in my own head, turning innocent moments into something sinister? I sighed, running my hands through my hair. I needed to fix this to make it right. I found her in the bedroom, standing by the window with her back to me. Her shoulders were tense, and I could see the faint rise and fall of her breathing. She didn't turn when I stepped inside. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice soft, almost hesitant. "I don't know what came over me." She turned in, her face blank. "What are you talking about?" "All of it. The questions, the accusations. I don't know what's wrong with me. Work's been stressful, and I guess I let it spill over into us." I took a breath, trying to find the right words. "I'm sorry I doubted you. I don't know why I let myself think." She held up a hand, stopping me mid-sentence. Her face was unreadable, her eyes sharp. "You think I would do something like that to you?" Her voice was low, almost a whisper, but there was an edge to it that sent a chill through me. "No," I said quickly. "I know you wouldn't." I trailed off, unsure of how to explain the tangled mess of thoughts that had taken over my mind. Her lips tightened for a moment before she spoke again. 8 years, she said. "We've been married for 8 years. Do you really think I'd throw that away for what? A fling? A new experience, as you put it?" Her words hit me like a slap. She wasn't yelling, but the weight behind them was worse than if she had been. I felt my chest tighten, guilt washing over me in waves. "I'm sorry," I said again, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I was thinking. You're right. I've let my insecurities get the better of me." She turned away, her hand resting on the windowsill. For a moment, the room was silent, the tension thick in the air. Then she sighed, shaking her head. "I love you," she said, her voice softer now. "I don't know how to make you believe that." "I do believe you," I said quickly. "I believe you." And in that moment I did. Her words felt genuine, her frustration real. Maybe I'd been wrong all along. I left her alone after that, retreating to the kitchen to grab a beer. I needed something to take the edge off, to quiet the noise in my head. Sitting at the table, I stared at the condensation dripping down the bottle, my thoughts spiraling. Why had I let myself get so paranoid? I'd almost driven myself mad with it. She was right. We'd built a life together, one that had weathered storms far worse than a few offhand suspicions. I felt foolish, almost ashamed. The hours ticked by. She came into the kitchen briefly, kissed my cheek, and said she was heading to a friend's house. I smiled, grateful for the gesture. Maybe this was the start of us finding our way back to each other. But after she left, the house felt empty in a way that I couldn't shake. I wandered aimlessly from room to room, the silence pressing in on me. Eventually, I decided to clean up a bit. I'd never been one for chores. She always handled them, and I'd never thought to question it. But tonight, it felt like a small way to make amends. I started in the living room, picking up stray cups and tidying the cushions on the couch. As I moved through the house, I felt a strange kind of satisfaction in the act. It was grounding, a way to distract myself from the lingering doubts in my mind. When I got to the bedroom, I began to straighten up the dresser. Her jewelry box sat on the corner, the lid slightly ajar. I reached out to close it, but paused when I noticed something strange. There, tucked beneath a pair of earrings, was a folded piece of paper. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over it. It wasn't like me to snoop. I'd already told myself I trusted her, hadn't I? But something about the way it was hidden, tucked away like a secret, made my pulse quicken. I unfolded the paper slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. At first, the words didn't make sense. It was a receipt for a hotel. The date was from last week, the day she'd told me she'd been working late. The room seemed to tilt around me, the edges of my vision blurring. I stared at the receipt, my mind racing. The name on it wasn't hers. It wasn't mine. And just like that, the certainty I'd clung to for the last 3 hours came crashing down. I stood in the middle of the bedroom, my heart still racing as I clutched the crumpled hotel receipt in my hand. Her words echoed in my mind, words that had felt so sincere only hours ago. I would never cheat on you. I love you. I swallowed hard, forcing the lump in my throat to go down. Maybe it's nothing, I thought, clinging to that fragile hope. Maybe it's just what she said, a favor for a friend. But the date didn't match up. It wasn't from a month ago, like she'd claimed when she told me about her friend needing a place to stay. This was recent, too recent. I let out a long breath, folding the receipt and slipping it into my pocket. Don't jump to conclusions. That had been my mistake before, hadn't it? Blowing things out of proportion, letting my insecurities drive me to the brink. But even as I told myself that, a dark, gnawing doubt settled in the pit of my stomach. I headed to the kitchen, the weight of my thoughts dragging at me. Maybe getting rid of the receipt would help clear my head. Out of sight, out of mind. I grabbed the trash can, intending to toss it into the bin outside, but as soon as I lifted it, I realized how heavy it was. Damn, I muttered under my breath, surprised at the weight. I carried it to the back door, fumbling with the handle. The bag shifted in my arms, awkward and unsteady. As I stepped outside, it tore. The contents spilled out in an avalanche of filth, a rank smell hitting me like a physical blow. My stomach churned, while rising in my throat. I staggered back, barely holding myself together. Jesus, when was the last time I took this out? The ground was littered with scraps of paper, crushed soda cans, food waste, and worse. I forced myself to crouch down, gathering the mess into a new bag. I wanted to get this over with as quickly as possible, to erase the evidence of my carelessness. But then something caught my eye, a flash of pale, rubbery material among the debris. I froze. Time seemed to slow as I reached for it, my hand trembling. When I held it up, I realized what it was, a condom. Used. The world tilted around me. My mind raced, grasping for explanations. At first, I tried to convince myself it was mine, but that hope was extinguished as quickly as it had come. It wasn't. The size alone made that obvious. I felt a scream claw its way up my throat, and when it escaped, it was raw and desperate. No, 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 no. Please. God, no. My voice cracked, the sound echoing off the walls of the house, swallowed by the night. My legs gave out, and I sank to the ground, the condom still clutched in my hand. The stench was unbearable, something fishy and sour, but I didn't care. My thoughts were louder than anything else, each one stabbing into me like a knife. She's cheating. She lied. She's been lying all along. For a moment, I just sat there, staring at the mess around me. The weight of the betrayal crushed me, making it hard to breathe. The hope I'd held on to for so long, her reassurances, her words of love, they all felt like a cruel joke now. Finally, I forced myself to move. My hands were shaking as I picked up the trash and shoved it into a new bag, barely noticing the sticky residue on my fingers. I felt numb, detached from my own body, like I was watching someone else go through the motions. The condom, though, that I couldn't ignore. I placed it on the kitchen table, its presence as damning as a confession. I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, my mind spinning with memories. Every moment of suspicion, every sign I'd ignored, came rushing back in vivid detail. The cologne, the late nights, the phone calls, the receipt. It all painted a picture I didn't want to see. She's with someone else. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles white, as a new kind of rage bubbled to the surface. This wasn't just heartbreak. It was humiliation. I had trusted her, defended her, apologized for doubting her. And she'd been laughing behind my back the whole time. The fishy smell lingered in the air, sharp and nauseating. I forced myself to clean up the rest of the mess, shoving everything into the bin and taking it outside. The cold night air did little to clear my head, and by the time I returned to the kitchen, the rage had turned into something colder, something sharper. I sat down at the table, staring at the condom as if it held all the answers I was too afraid to ask for. What now? The question hung heavy in the air. The man I'd been 3 hours ago, the one who apologized, who believed her lies, was gone. In his place was someone else entirely. Someone who was ready to find the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I sat at the kitchen table, the weight of the discovery still crushing me. My fingers tapped against the wood as I debated my next move. Calling her would be pointless. I could already hear her denials, her perfectly rehearsed outrage. How could you think that about me? After 8 years? No, if I was going to confront her, I needed something she couldn't talk her way out of. The condom lay there, a silent testament to everything I feared. I grabbed a small plastic bag, stuffed it inside, and hid it in the back of a drawer beneath a pile of unused kitchen towels. My hands were trembling as I slammed the drawer shut. Just as I turned around, the door creaked open, and she stepped inside. "Hey, honey," she called out, her voice cheerful. "What smells so good? It's familiar. Have you been eating fish without me?" I froze. The words hit me like a gut punch. My stomach churned, my mind racing to process what she'd just said. The stench that had made me gag was apparently pleasant to her. She even smiled, tilting her head like she was genuinely curious. I stammered out the first excuse that came to mind. "Oh yeah, there was some fish in the fridge from a couple of days ago. Thought I'd finish it off." She wrinkled her nose, but in amusement, not disgust. "You're terrible. You know I hate missing out on fish nights." Her tone was teasing, light. It was the kind of thing she might have said years ago, back when we were happy, back before everything started falling apart. Before I could respond, she leaned in and kissed me, the act so normal it was jarring. I stiffened under her touch, barely managing a weak smile. "I'll be upstairs," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "I need to grab a shower. Don't wait too long to come up." She disappeared up the stairs, leaving me rooted to the spot, my mind spinning. The contrast between her words and her actions was dizzying. That kiss, that easy smile, it felt wrong now, like a mask she perfected. And her reaction to the smell of fish. I shook my head, trying to push the thought away. "Focus. You need a plan." I sat back down, my hands gripping the edge of the table. Following her when she went out wouldn't work. She'd catch on too quickly. I needed something better, something that would draw her lover out into the open. Something undeniable. Then it hit me. If I pretended to leave for a few days, her guard would drop. She'd think she had the house to herself. If she really was seeing someone, there was no way she wouldn't invite him over. I could catch them in the act, and that would be the end of it. No more excuses. No more lies. The question was, where would I go? Before I could figure it out, my phone buzzed on the counter. I reached for it, glancing at the screen. It was Brian, one of my oldest friends. "Josh," he said, his voice bright. "We're having a party tonight, out at the cabin by the lake. You should come. It's been too long." I opened my mouth to decline. I wasn't exactly in the mood for company, but then I stopped. A party. An excuse to leave town. It was perfect. "Actually," I said, forcing some enthusiasm into my voice. "That sounds like a great idea." "What time?" "Any time after 8. Just bring yourself. We got everything covered." "Sounds good. I'll see you there." I hung up and leaned back in my chair, the plan taking shape in my mind. I'd pack a small bag, tell her I was going out of town for a couple of days, and wait. If she thought I was gone, she'd be comfortable enough to reveal herself. And when she did, I'd be ready. Upstairs, I could hear the sound of the shower running. My heart ached as I listened, the reality of what I was about to do settling over me like a heavy weight. Part of me wanted to be wrong, to find nothing, to come home and feel like a fool for doubting her. But the other part, the part that had seen the receipt, the condom, the lies, knew better. I stood, grabbing my keys from the counter. It was time to set the trap. I stood in the kitchen, the weight of the plan pressing on my chest. My wife was humming softly upstairs, the sound somehow both normal and surreal. It was strange how the ordinary could feel so wrong when you were watching for lies beneath it. I took a deep breath and called out, "Hey, honey, I just got a call from Brian. He's throwing a party out by the lake, and I thought I'd head over for a day or two. I need the break." Her footsteps on the stairs slowed, and when she came into view, her expression was cautious. "A party? Out of nowhere?" "Yeah," I said, keeping my tone light. "He called me just a few minutes ago." I pulled out my phone and showed her the call log, the timestamp still fresh. Her eyes flicked over the screen, and I could tell she was trying to gauge whether or not I was lying. As if on cue, Brian's name popped up on the screen again, and my phone buzzed in my hand. I picked it up. "Brian?" "Hey, man," Brian said, his voice as loud and cheerful as ever. "I'm on my way to grab some ice and drinks before heading to the cabin. Just wanted to check if you're bringing anything." I glanced at her, catching the flicker of relief that passed across her face. "She's buying it." "Actually," I said, my tone casual, "why don't you swing by my place? We can ride together." Brian paused, confused. Sure, man. I'm not far from you anyway. Be there in 10. I hung up and slipped the phone back into my pocket, turning to her with a grin. "See? It's all set." Her tension seemed to melt away, replaced by something lighter. Relief? Happiness? She smiled and stepped closer. "You should go. Have fun. You've been so stressed lately, you deserve it." "You could come with me," I offered, watching her reaction closely. "It might do us both some good to get out for a bit." She shook her head almost immediately, a small laugh escaping her lips. "As tempting as that sounds, I think I'll pass. I just want some peace and quiet. Maybe I'll do a face mask, catch up on a book." Her answer was exactly what I'd hoped for, but it still stung. She didn't even hesitate, as if she was eager to be rid of me. "All right," I said, forcing a smile. "I'll pack a bag." Upstairs, I threw together a few essentials, my hands shaking with a mix of adrenaline and dread. This was it. If I was wrong, it would mean coming home to awkward apologies and a bruised ego. But if I was right, I didn't let myself finish the thought. By the time I came downstairs, Brian's car was parked out front, the engine idling. My wife was at the door, her smile warm and easy. She kissed me on the cheek as I slung my bag over my shoulder. "Have fun," she said. "Don't drink too much." I climbed into the passenger seat, waving at her as she stood in the doorway. Once we were out of sight, Brian glanced at me, confusion etched across his face. "All right, man, spill. Why do I feel like you're about to tell me something insane?" I let out a long breath, the words spilling out faster than I intended. I told him everything, the suspicions, the receipt, the condom. His face shifted from surprise to disbelief, then to quiet understanding. "Damn, Josh," he said, shaking his head. "I don't even know what to say. Are you sure about this? I mean, catching her in the act, that's heavy." "It's the only way," I said. "If I confront her without proof, she'll just deny it. I need to know for sure." Brian nodded, gripping the wheel tightly. "All right. Where do you want me to take you?" "Nearest hotel," I said. He whistled low, a mix of amusement and sympathy. "You got guts, man. I'll give you that." 10 minutes later, he pulled up outside a modest-looking hotel. "You sure about this?" he asked one last time. I nodded, my jaw tight. "Go to the party. Have fun. I'll be fine here." As I checked in and made my way to the room, a heavy silence settled over me. I sat on the edge of the bed, my bag at my feet, staring at the clock. 30 minutes. That's all it would take to know if my plan was working. I leaned back, the room feeling colder than it should. The minutes ticked by, each one dragging slower than the last. And then, the waiting began. The hotel room felt suffocating, its stillness pressing down on me. I'd spent the last 30 minutes staring at the walls, my mind racing with possibilities. Was she alone? Was he already there? Was I making a mistake by waiting? The questions churned in my head until I couldn't sit still any longer. This isn't working. Staying here felt passive, like admitting defeat. I needed to act. If I waited too long, I might miss my chance to catch her. I grabbed my jacket, left the room, and found an electric scooter parked outside the hotel. It wasn't exactly subtle, but it was quick, and I didn't want to risk calling a cab or walking. Within minutes, I was gliding through the quiet streets, the hum of the scooter the only sound in the still night air. As I approached the house, my heart pounded harder with every passing second. I slowed down, ditching the scooter a block away to avoid making any noise. The house looked normal, too normal. The front lights were on, and everything seemed still. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe she's just upstairs reading a book. But then I crept closer, my movements careful and deliberate. The glow from the living room window spilled onto the lawn, and I crouched beneath it, holding my breath. Peering over the windowsill, I saw her. She was pacing the living room, her phone pressed to her ear. She wasn't laughing or smiling, just talking in a low, serious tone. I couldn't make out the words, but her movements were tense, her free hand gesturing slightly as she spoke. I ducked lower, trying to keep out of sight. My legs began to cramp from crouching, but I didn't dare move. Don't blow it now. Not like last time. The minutes dragged on. Her conversation ended, and she disappeared upstairs. I stayed where I was, the cold from the ground seeping into my knees. I was ready to sit there all night if I had to. After a while, curiosity got the better of me. Maybe they're in another room, or maybe I missed him somehow. I crept around the side of the house, carefully peeking into every window. The lights were on in almost every room, but there was no one there. The kitchen was empty. The dining room was untouched. When I reached the back of the house, I froze. Upstairs, I saw her silhouette moving through the bedroom. She was doing something at the vanity, fixing her hair, maybe. Then she moved out of sight. I crept to the back door, slowly reaching for the handle. It was unlocked. Perfect. I was about to push it open when I heard footsteps on the stairs. I quickly ducked behind the bushes, holding my breath. She appeared a moment later, descending the staircase. My jaw tightened when I saw her. She was wearing a fitted red dress, her makeup flawless, her hair styled to perfection. My chest tightened as realization dawned. She's not just waiting for someone. She's waiting for him. She walked with purpose to the front door, her heels clicking softly on the floor. My heart pounded as I edged closer to the corner of the house, careful to keep out of sight. She opened the door, and my stomach dropped. He was standing there, tall, muscular, and impeccably dressed. He looked like he had stepped out of a fashion magazine. A crisp black blazer, tailored pants, polished shoes. His skin was a rich, dark brown, his jawline sharp, his posture confident. He carried himself with the ease of someone who knew exactly how much attention he commanded. I held my breath, my mind racing. How long has he been standing there? Did he see me? Panic clawed at my throat as I pressed myself tighter against the house. She smiled at him, a smile I hadn't seen in years. It wasn't the polite smile she gave me after an argument or the tired one she wore when the day had worn her down. This was different. This was electric. They exchanged a few words, her voice light and teasing, his deep and smooth. She reached out, brushing a hand against his chest in a gesture that made my blood boil. I gritted my teeth, my fist clenching. How long has this been going on? How many nights has she done this while I sat at home, oblivious? My body trembled with a mix of anger and despair, but I forced myself to stay put. You can't blow your cover. Not yet. The man stepped inside, and she closed the door behind him. My heart sank as the lock clicked into place. This is it. For a moment, I stood there, paralyzed by the weight of what I'd just seen. The anger surged again, hot and blinding, but I shoved it down. Not yet. You need proof. You need more than just a glimpse through a window. I took a deep breath, my mind scrambling for my next move. What happens now? I crouched low beneath the window, peering into the kitchen. The two of them were seated at the table, an expensive bottle of wine between them. I recognized the wine immediately. It was one we'd bought together for a special occasion, something we'd planned to save for an anniversary or milestone. The sight of her pouring it so casually, her laughter filling the room as she leaned toward him, made my stomach churn. I watched as she played with her hair, tucking it behind her ear in that flirtatious way she used to do with me when we were first dating. His eyes never left her, his posture relaxed, confident, as if he owned the space. Then it happened. She stood, circling around the table, and climbed into his lap. My heart thundered in my chest as I watched her lips meet his, the kiss slow and deliberate. Her hands trailed down his chest, her movements bold and intimate in a way that made my blood run cold. I couldn't take it anymore. My breath hitched as anger surged through me, raw and uncontrollable. Without thinking, I bolted to the front door. The noise of my footsteps on the porch seemed deafening in the quiet night, but I didn't care. I flung the door open with a force that made it slam against the wall, the sound reverberating through the house. "So this is how you honor 8 years of marriage?" I bellowed, my voice shaking with fury. "This is what you do while I'm not home?" The room went silent. They both froze, her straddling him, his hands resting awkwardly on her hips. She turned to look at me, her expression shifting from shock to something else entirely. I expected guilt, tears, anything that would show even a shred of remorse. But instead, her face hardened. She climbed off his lap, smoothing her dress as she stood. "You don't deserve me," she said, her voice cold and sharp. "I don't love you anymore." The words hit me like a freight train. My hands clenched in a fist at my sides as I stared at her, my mind struggling to process what she'd just said. "I've been trying to tell you for months," she continued, her tone rising. "I've fallen out of love with you. I can't pretend anymore. I need someone who's exciting, someone with a chiseled body, not some dirtbag like you." The insult stung worse than I could have imagined. It felt like everything I'd built my life around was crumbling before my eyes. "Then why the hell didn't you just leave?" I shouted, my voice cracking with emotion. "Why bring this clown into our home? Why not go to his house if you're so in love with him?" She scoffed, folding her arms across her chest. "Because this is my house too. And frankly, I wasn't hiding anything. You're the one who's been too blind to see what's been happening right in front of you." My gaze flicked to the man, who had risen to his feet, his hands raised slightly as if to show he wasn't a threat. He looked confused, unsure of what to say or do. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but I cut him off. "Get out," I snarled, pointing toward the door. "Both of you, get out of my house." The man hesitated, glancing at her for guidance, but she didn't move. I took a step forward, my anger boiling over. I said, "Get out." My voice echoed through the house, the sheer force of it making him flinch. He finally complied, brushing past me without a word. His towering frame seemed smaller now, his confident demeanor crumbling under the weight of the situation. I followed him to the door, slamming it shut behind him. When I turned back to her, she was still standing in the kitchen, her arms crossed, her expression defiant. "You think you're the victim here," she spat. "You haven't been a husband to me in years. You've been distant, boring, and so wrapped up in yourself you never even noticed me slipping away." Her words cut deep, but I refused to let her see how much they hurt. "You don't get to rewrite history," I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. "I was there every step of the way. I gave you everything I had. And this is how you repay me?" She rolled her eyes, brushing past me as she headed for the stairs. "I'm staying tonight," she said over her shoulder. "We can talk about what to do next tomorrow." I wanted to scream, to argue, to throw her words back in her face. But I couldn't. The fight had drained out of me, leaving only an unbearable heaviness in its place. When she disappeared upstairs, I sank onto the couch, burying my face in my hands. The silence of the house was deafening now, the memories of her laughter and warmth replaced by the cold reality of betrayal. And then I cried, not the quiet, controlled tears of someone mourning a loss, but the raw, ugly sobs of a man whose world had just fallen apart. I sat on the couch, my hands gripping the sides of my head, tears streaming down my face. The pain wasn't just emotional. It was physical, like something had torn inside me. Every breath felt labored, every thought sharper than the last. Why the hell is she still here? This was my house. I bought it, brick by brick, with every drop of sweat and sacrifice I'd made over the years. And now she was upstairs, probably lying in the bed we shared, as if nothing had happened. Rage began to boil inside me, pushing the sadness aside. I stood, the motion sudden, almost violent. No, this is it. She's not staying here another second. I stormed upstairs, the sound of my footsteps echoing through the empty house. When I reached the bedroom door, I pounded on it with my fist. "Open the door," I yelled, my voice shaking with fury. "You don't belong here anymore." There was no answer, just silence. My jaw tightened as I pounded again, harder this time. Still nothing. That's when the decision crystallized in my mind. I wasn't going to wait for her to grant me the dignity of a response. I shoved my shoulder into the door, the frame shuddering beneath the force. It took 2 more hits before the lock gave way, splintering as the door swung open. She was standing by the bed, startled but defiant, her arms crossed over her chest. "What the hell are you doing?" she shouted. "This is my house," I roared, pointing toward the door. "Get your things and get out." She stared at me, her face a mix of shock and anger. "This is our house," she snapped. "I have just as much right to be here as you do." I stepped closer, my chest heaving. "I bought this house. I paid for it. Don't you dare try to claim something you had no hand in building." Her face paled slightly, the reality of my words sinking in. But she recovered quickly, her lips curling into a sneer. "You're pathetic," she spat. "You think throwing me out makes you the bigger person?" "I don't care what it makes me," I shot back. "You betrayed me. You don't get to stay here. Not after what you've done." She hesitated, her bravado cracking as she looked away. For a moment, I thought she might argue again, but instead, she let out a sharp breath and grabbed her suitcase from the closet. "Fine," she said, her voice icy. "If this is how you want it, I'll go." I stood in the doorway, watching as she threw her things into the suitcase with jerky, angry movements. When she was done, she grabbed her bag and stormed past me without a word. I followed her downstairs, my jaw clenched. When she reached the front door, she turned, as if she had something else to say. But whatever it was, she thought better of it. She stepped outside, and I closed the door behind her, the sound final and deafening. I stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door. The anger that had fueled me was gone, replaced by an eerie calm. I didn't feel pity for her, or sadness, or regret. I felt nothing. That night, I went to bed without giving her another thought. The room was quiet, the bed cold, but I didn't care. For the first time in what felt like forever, the silence was mine. The next morning, my phone buzzed incessantly with messages. Friends asking about her. Some texts were vague, others more direct. I ignored them all. I didn't want to hear her name, didn't want to talk about what had happened. Then Brian called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hey," I said, my voice groggy. "Josh," Brian said, his tone urgent. "Is it true? About your wife?" "What are you talking about?" I asked, annoyed. "She's in the hospital," he said. "Everyone's saying she was in an accident last night. Are you okay?" I paused, the words sinking in. "An accident?" For a brief moment, an old, familiar concern flickered in my chest, but I extinguished it quickly. "I don't know," I said flatly. "And I don't care." "Josh," he started, but I cut him off. "I don't want to talk about her. Not now. Not ever." I hung up, my hand trembling slightly as I set the phone down. I sat there for a moment, staring at the floor. I thought about what Brian had said, about her lying in a hospital bed somewhere. But the thought didn't linger. I shook it off, forcing myself to move forward. She wasn't my concern anymore. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into starting over. I sold the house, packed up my life, and moved to a new city. Somewhere far away, where her ghost couldn't follow me. Each day felt a little lighter than the last. Slowly, I began to rebuild, to rediscover parts of myself I'd forgotten in the chaos. And as the memories of her began to fade, I realized that I hadn't just lost her. I'd lost the man I was when I was with her. But now, I was free to find him again.